Our next presenter is Dale Lutz, co-founder. He's so excited, I'm not even sure if I'll finish my introduction. I think he's going to just run up on stage and knock me off the stage. So Dale Lutz, co-founder, co-CEO of Safe Software. Has anybody been to the Surrey Memorial Hospital? Anybody here? Have you ever looked at the building across the street? You'll notice the Safe logo, right? So you've got, I think, 5 floors there. So it's right across from the hospital. So for Dale, it's either going to the hospital or going to the office. Which one do you prefer? All right, go to the office. All right, so Dale, why don't you come on up? Dale is going to be talking about the future of work, lessons on navigating the new reality. And this is an extremely interesting and relevant topic for everyone in here. The format will be, Dale will do a presentation for approximately 15-20 minutes. There's a short video as part of it. And then once he's finished his presentation, I'll come up, we'll do a Q&A for about 10 minutes or so. So while he's speaking, if you have questions you think of, text them to that number that was on the screen, and then we'll get to them after Dale's finished his presentation. Oh, sorry, Paul, can you put it up on the screen? There it is, thank you.
Okay, well, 2,600 years ago, Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, told us that the only constant is change. A few years after that, I was in grade 9, and I was given this book by one of my teachers, by the famous futurist Alvin Toffler, who had written previously, this previous book was called Future Shock, which was about how in the 70s, as a society, we weren't able, as humans, to cope with the rate of change, which I did read then too. Yes, I was very popular in middle school. But the third wave, I remember reading it, and parts of it came back to me near the beginning of the pandemic, because in that book, and where my bookmark was actually when I dug it off my shelf, was the pages where Toffler talked about something called the electronic cottage. So remember, this is written in 1979. And the idea was, in this cottage, you'd be able to do your work, and you wouldn't have to travel anywhere, and this would be something that would become a common thing. He foresaw that the cost of communication was going to become decoupled from the distance of that communication and the amount of data that's happening as well, that communication basically become free. He saw that in 1979. It's interesting that he said already in 75, telecommuting could have taken been practical for up to 12% of the jobs that there were already then. That's a long time ago. 34 years later, this book was put out by these small software company founders from a company called 37 Signals. They make a product called Basecamp. Some of you may have used that product. They were kind of trailblazers in the idea of having a company where there's no office. It's all completely remote. And so this book was a manual written in 2009 on how to run a remote company. Now, these people that did this were kind of on the fringes. They were not mainstream at all. All these years after, Toffler thought this would be how we'd be working. Well, let's do a little case study of my own company, Safe Software. As Rick said, we have this building. We bought this 5 floors, the top 5 floors in there in 2016 when it was just air. We had faith that one day there'd be something there. And then in 2018 in December, we moved in. And 3 years ago, almost to the day, and you'll see that in a second, we produced this video, which you can go see on our website, that was kind of like a tour of that place. So let's see if I can get this to go. So, you know, when I watch that now, and it actually even just hit me again, that fills me with sorrow. Like, I have grief when I see that, because that world, that's only 3 years ago and one day. You saw one of those that said November the 14th was the day. That world is gone. That world is gone. And another part of me thinks that maybe I deserved it, because as Rick would know, as a good Mennonite farm boy, what are you not supposed to be? You're not supposed to be proud, Rick. And there was some pride going on in there. And I think that, as my mother said, pride cometh before the fall, which is what happened here. So on March the 11th, 2020, we send out this note saying that, hey, we're going to have to maybe watch this and see what's going to happen. Let's be all working together, whatever. And only 24 hours later, we say, that's it, and we're done, and nobody's going to be coming back. And we optimistically say through the end of March 2020. We probably shouldn't have put a year there. So anyway, it went on for a long time. And so what this means, what we've come to, is that the future that Alvin Toffler spoke of has finally arrived. And it arrived suddenly. It like bang, just happened. So yeah, the future is now, or as William Gibson has said, the future is here, but it isn't evenly distributed. And I think that that is also true because if we look at this room, every one of you will be dealing with this issue in your own work environment in a slightly different way depending on your circumstances. So it's not like one size fits all. The other thing that we can conclude is that the future is arriving more quickly than it used to. Or as someone else has said, the pace of change has never been this fast, but yet it will never again be this slow. And if you want proof of that, well, an Alberta farm boy just quoted a Prime Minister Trudeau up here. So that's pretty amazing. And you might ask, will you do it again? To which I'd say, just watch me. Some of you are around in 72. You know what I'm referring to. That was actually very, very funny if you're around in 72. So anyway, in November of 2020, Bill Gates, before he was as disgraced, put out this podcast that was about a number of interesting big topics, but one of them was, what is the future of the world going to look like after COVID-19? And there was 7 points that they made, but there are 2 that I'll highlight. One is that he predicted that remote meetings will become the norm. And I argue that they have become the norm. It is no longer an odd thing to expect to have a remote meeting. And I've got some friends from Barnabas here. On the board of Barnabas, prior to the fall of 2020, if you wanted to do a remote meeting, oh boy, you were in for some challenges as the various people tried to get their tech together and people's mics were awful and it was just horrific to try to do a remote meeting. Now what's it like? Everybody's grandchildren has fixed up Grandma and Grandpa's computing system, and they're all absolutely crystal clear with their HD cameras and wonderful microphones. So yes, remote meetings are not an odd thing to have happen. But I would strongly argue that just because they have become the norm, my feeling is that they are like a 2D world experience, and when you get together like this, that's 3D. And it is the case we can get a lot done, but it is not really a full substitute for getting together. But nonetheless, that's the kind of world we live in, and so now we have to figure out, all of us, when are we going to use each of these tools? When is it worth getting on a plane and going somewhere? When is it good enough to just get on Zoom? I'll also highlight this one because I saw some evidence of this just even in the last week. Bill Gates said our communities are going to be reshaped, and what he was referring to in there is that the idea of a bunch of people leaving their communities and coming together means, what we used to do means that there were services and so on in place for those central gathering places. What's the situation like now? Well, on the left is a scene from Fort Langley where I live, and the building on the right is a little cafe called Saba. What's happened to Saba in Fort Langley? They have about quadrupled their floor space. They've opened another restaurant nearby this one. They kept this one as well. Why is that? There's people around all the time, including me. Like I don't go to the office every day. I drop by there. I may have been on a carrot cake thing for, it's the best carrot cake in British Columbia. Is that okay, Rick, if I say that? Saba in Fort Langley. What's the picture on the right? That's a Freshie. There used to be a Freshie, and I say it in the past tense, there used to be a Freshie on the main floor of CC2 where the Safe Software building is. Imagine my surprise and sadness when I walked by that thing last week and they were ripping it out. It's going broke. So what's happened? There's not as many people gathering. Bill Gates was right. The central restaurant is disappearing. The ones in the hinterlands are flourishing. Now, there's another restaurant in our building that is flourishing. Why is that? It does delivery. It is not just catering to the office workers. So if you are in that kind of a business, you got to think about the world you're in, and I can't rely on all those 150 engineers that don't know how to cook that are up on the 5th floor or the 9th floor here. I'm going to have to start figuring out how I service the community I'm around. So now what are we going to do? well, we're stuck with this office. We got 5 floors of fantastic real estate, and it's a beautiful place to work. So what do we do about that, and what are companies doing? And so there's really 5 options. And you can get this link from me afterwards if you want to read more details from the Harvard Business Review. So one of them is you go back to the way it is. And the way this is done, as we've seen in the last week, is you send a late-night email to all your staff and say, get in the office by tomorrow or you're fired, Elon Musk. That's one way of managing that. And there are some companies that have said, you got to get back here. But you know what? There's a host of people for whom they don't want to do that. And Apple tried to do this, had to retreat. I think that maybe Elon can get away with it. If your goal is that you want 3/4 of the people to quit, maybe that's the way to go. But that's a tough one to do. Activity-based. So use the office, but say, hey, we'll only get together when we're doing planning meetings. We won't pretend that we have offices here. We'll just have group working areas, and it'll be task-based. We'll come in when we're doing something, and otherwise we won't. Hub and spoke, where you say, we won't have the office in downtown Vancouver, but we think there's value in us getting together. Let's have a satellite in Chilliwack. Let's have one in Abbotsford. Let's have one in Horseshoe Bay. That's another model that some are using. Yet other companies are saying, hey, we're out of here. We're going to go 100% remote. And that's in the tech world, a lot of that happening. Or lastly, if you're in a situation that's safe, is you say, okay, the office is really a clubhouse. So it's a hybrid world. Well, SAFE has said, hey, you can do whatever you want. We're not going to tell you where you need to be. And about 30 of our staff have now moved out of the Lower Mainland. Before the pandemic, we had 4 people living in, one was two hours south of Winnipeg, and one was on Salt Spring Island. We had scattered a little bit, 4 of them. Now we have 30 of them. We have been able to hire some amazing talent we wouldn't have never been able to before, some in Toronto area that we just wouldn't have had access to, one in Edmonton like that. But the ones that are around here, because we've said, hey, you don't have to come in, mostly they don't come in. If you go into that office on a Monday, actually the most excitement we had this Monday, we had an ice cream cake because it was the birthday of our product, so that got a few people to come in. We had a flu shot clinic, that's pretty exciting. That dragged 90 people in. But we're trying to maybe up our attractional game here a little bit, and it's been our tradition all these years to celebrate American Thanksgiving with a big turkey dinner for the staff, because we know the Americans, who are 40% of our clients, they're not working, so we can have an extendo lunch. And so we are going to do that again. That's going to be an interesting experiment coming up. We had to put out a poll, how many people will be coming, because we don't know. And so it'll be our first time gathering. But this model of office as a clubhouse is a big deal. So yes, Rick, I paid $8 for the blue check mark there to get that on there. So, so if you're going to do it as a clubhouse model, though, you got to figure out why is it you're bringing people back. And so for some set of people, it's so they can focus. There are lots of people for whom their home environment is not conducive to working remotely. I remember the father of 5 children under the age of 7 saying, please let me come back to the office during the pandemic. And so those sort of people, the couple that lives in a tiny Vancouver apartment where they're both working remotely, wants to get out of there. So there's some set of people for whom they come to do that. There's another set for whom they want to collaborate with each other. They want to bond with each other. I'm being sexist here, but the single young engineer males, they like coming to the office because that's their social group. Who are they going to play Dungeons and Dragons with if they don't come there? And that is actually true. You think that's funny? I'm not joking. So engagement and productivity, I see that. Learning and growing, and that's one. I haven't made this rule yet, but I think I will channel a tiny little bit of Elon Musk and say, if you're going to be a co-op student or an intern at our company, you're going to have to come in here 2 days a week. Because I look at my son's experience being a remote worker as a co-op student, and it is a lifeless, soulless, dead thing. Yes, he got some money, but that's about all he got. And so I really, really feel for the young people, the lack of mentoring. You just can't recreate that in a hybrid world. So yeah, it's got to be a place for great work to happen and a place for socializing. So what does Dan Pink say about how you lure people back to the office? Get rid of the busy work. And for a while, this was my problem. I didn't want to go to the office because if all I was going to do when I'm in there is be 8 hours on video meetings, I can do that just as well at home. So in my case, I'm going in twice a week, and I've changed my calendar so that when I'm in the office, I basically ban video meetings. If I've come in here, I'm going to make sure that whoever I'm meeting with is also in there that day. And so there's been a reorganization of calendars to optimize that, because it is a 3D meeting when you are together. And then you've got to figure out what these new in-person rituals are. Don't make things forced, but try to figure out, why is it that you want people to get together? What is it that's there? Because the incentives otherwise are just to stay home. And I will say that as I've met people at the flu clinic, I say, oh, how often do you come to the office? They say, oh, I really want to get coming in. I'm planning to. It seems like that's a common thing that people that aren't coming in tell me. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. On any given day, they go, oh yeah, I'd like to come to the office, but not today, I got to drive. And some have said to me, I don't want to come in because I'm going to wait for the price of gas to go down, which is an interesting one, because before they came in all the time, but now when I say, hey, you can do whatever you want, well, if they come to the office, that's costing them money. So they got to figure, like, why am I going to come in? Maybe they will for the free turkey dinner, but we'll see. The other interesting thing there, electric car drivers. We have 5 EV stalls. Those are actually always filled up, if not oversubscribed right now. The EV people come in. Now, maybe it's because they're cheap, because they know they can charge when they're there. But the other thing EV people have done is, like you'd like to say, when you buy an electric vehicle, you've pre-bought the gas. So darn it, you're going to drive that thing. So anyway, but it is an interesting thing. So I'll leave you with this. The best way to predict the future is to create it. All of you are in an opportunity, a place where you can create that for your own organizations. And we'll see what's going to happen. And with that, Rick, come on up.
All right, I think my headset's not working, so I'll go with this for the time being. One question came in. They wanted further information on that carrot cake.
It is the best carrot cake in British Columbia. It's a little bit much to eat in one sitting. My advice is you go down there, you buy it, you walk it home, and you cut it in half, and you can have it 2 days in a row. The Cheap Mennonite's Guide to Fort Langley.
See, at this conference, we want to have really, really practical takeaways. So one of the biggest takeaways is I now know where to get the best carrot cake in BC. Perfect.
Yep.
So Dale and I have had a lot of discussions about this issue, and it's so fascinating because it impacts everyone. So let's just start with one of the classic issues related to the future of work. People are working remotely. What about culture and integrating people into a team? So like you say, someone's working from home, especially with the amount of turnover in businesses, you got new employees. How do you make that sticky?
And that is the huge question. Our company had such a culture prior of basically nobody ever left. Like, you started at our company, you stayed, we had a very, very low attrition rate. There was a long history of lunchtime sports. I know of some of the engineers that actually moved from Ontario to work at our company because they liked playing soccer at lunchtime, or there was ball hockey at lunchtime, there was a running club at lunchtime, all these things, and whoosh, all of that gone, like, suddenly. And some of those people that were lifetime soccer players at SAFE left during the pandemic. And I'm convinced that had the pandemic not happened, they'd still be with us. As one of them said, I'm going to close my computer on Friday, and on Monday I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to be working at a different place. And that's really the only difference in their life they're going to notice. So yeah. How do we make it a place that has some kind of heart and glue and culture? And so I think there's a few ways, but I think paying some bucks and getting people together. So bring them together for food. We just held our worldwide user conference. It was twice delayed. We had 500 customers from around the world, 200 staff. I did not realize what a reunion it was going to be. That surprised me on the first day. It was a bit overwhelming because I was thinking about all the staff or all the customers coming, but wow, here's somebody that I worked with shoulder to shoulder for 15 years, and I hadn't seen him in 3 years, and now there I am. And so that kind of an event that brings people together. There was an embarrassing one. I'm in the men's room chatting with this guy. He's got an Irish accent, and we're having good conversation. I say, oh, so who do you work for? He says, I'm a sales guy at Safe Software. Imagine my embarrassment there. I don't even know really who my own staff are. And so that's that's a bit of a hard thing. But yeah, I think we have to do things, invest on bringing people together, having some kind of group shared rituals periodically. Yes, it'll cost some bucks, but I think it's necessary.
Well, one issue that comes up is the relative bargaining power of parties these days. You know, we're in an environment where jobs are plenty in many sectors, so employers in the past might have wanted to do things a certain way, but today, in a sense, they don't have an option if they want to have people work for them. So from your standpoint, how much do you mandate this is the way it's going to be, or this is our policy, versus, in a sense, catering to whatever the mentality is of people you need to have work for you?
Yeah, and that pendulum is swinging, through 2021. Definitely the high-tech job market went crazy. And so it was, really as an employer, we had very little power. We had to bend over backwards to get somebody to work for us. What was interesting is, of course, all these tech layoffs that have happened in the last 2 months. I don't know yet what the effect on the bargaining situation is going to end up being. But there's been some funny, interesting things that we've had to grapple with. So right now, I do not think we could tell people that they had to come to our office at all. Like, I think that's pretty ingrained in our culture, and we'd have a hard time getting people back there with a stick. Now, I can try to entice them with carrots and make it worthwhile. But I don't want to be somebody that's going to be dictatorial anyway. I want them to come because they feel that there's value and that they're getting something for it. But we've had some interesting things. So you recruit somebody, you're on the call with them, they're from, let's say, another province, I won't say which one, and they say, hey, I want to work for you, but I want to keep my old job. Okay, that's an interesting one that wouldn't have happened before. You want to keep your old job and this new job. So we've at least said no to that. We had another interesting case where someone that was hired would never show up for meetings. Never. They were always late, never showing up. So finally, it's in their probation time. That's it. We're going to say goodbye. So we book a meeting for HR to basically fire them, and they don't show up for that. So I think it's sort of like George Costanza. They found a loophole. We had to pay them until they finally came to the meeting to be fired. It was interesting.
Well, yeah. These are just really interesting times. So let's relate it to the video which discussed collaboration. So there's this, let's call it traditional or old school notion that collaboration happens when people get together. We have office space. We want you to get together. Here's the room where we all sit around and we talk about ideas. But with people working remotely, have you documented that, no, collaboration happens better at the office, it must be at the office? Or what about the counter argument that, no, that's maybe an outmoded way of looking at it, we can do collaboration virtually?
So, and that's, you may all be frustrated with me because all I see is gray. I cannot tell you that one is better than the other. I absolutely know that we have had some meetings that are far, far better done remotely than ever would have been done in person. We use a tool called Miro, and with a whiteboarding thing, and if it's well facilitated, you get everybody contributing. The quiet person has as loud a voice as the boisterous person. And wonderful things have happened in those kinds of meetings. I have seen it. At the same time, I've been part of some brainstorming meetings where we're trying to come up with like a vision statement for what our product is all about. And it was such a wonderful, rich time. I can't imagine that we could have had that because we were physically moving and pointing and jumping at things. So it seems to me like it depends. Every scenario has to be judged case by case, and there are going to be some where well done virtual meeting is going to be absolutely as good, and others where, you know what, you better get the people together, and we're all going to have to find our way.
Now, one issue that often comes up is generational differences, and maybe particularly acute in the high-tech space. So how do you balance this notion of, on one level, giving people what they want in order to attract them, versus trying not to, what from your perspective might be caving in for all these demands?
Yes. And we just had some interesting cases like this. When we first crafted our policy about remote work, we said, you can work up to 3 months from anywhere in the world. That was, I don't know where we got that number from, but we said 3 months. Okay, what we've had feedback from our team leads and so on that says, you know what, for most of the staff, when they take off like that, they're not performing at the same rate. If you're sitting on the beach in Hawaii, you probably don't have quite the same skin in it as if you're, dealing with a nice, cold, rainy day here in Vancouver. So we've just cut that back to 1 month per year, and we're still exploring that. I use the phrase, and I know that I'm guilty of this. When I'm working, when I'm on a trip or whatever, I call it grazing. I'm grazing. I'm picking off the easy things, but the deep things are piling up because I'm not dealing with them. And so how long can you afford for people to graze? Again, some of your staff might be able to be absolutely as productive. They can shut off the outside world. But in general, there's something to be watched for there. We just had somebody that we asked not to leave, and they took off anyway and went to another country. Part of this is actually you got to watch out for tax issues. So if you have staff working in some U.S. states, and all of a sudden that state decides, hey, you've got a presence here, now you've got to start filing income tax there. So you got to be really careful, and we are putting in more rules around where people can actually work from. But within Canada, basically, knock yourself out. But outside of that, you have to be a little bit careful. And again, it's a bit gray.
Does the situation for an employer like yourself get a bit muddy where if we start talking about paying someone for remote work, then in a sense, employees in Canada could work for U.S. companies, get paid in U.S. dollars, get paid a lot more, and still live in Vancouver?
Yes.
So is that working against you in the sense of you can't get people because they can work in Vancouver, get paid in U.S. dollars, and make a lot more money?
I think the average raise at my company in 2021 was 20%. And that was a big part of it. Like the tech salaries went nuts because of that. Now, right now, that the air is coming out of the balloon, but we're not going to dock people's salary. But a little bit that kind of got ahead of things. But yes, there aren't. If a company wants to, and you want to deal with the legal parts of it, you can hire someone from just about any part of the world and have them work for you and pay them however much you want. Like I go back to those base camp guys, the remote work. They made the policy in that company that they're going to look at the top tech salary for somebody in San Francisco, and that's what they're going to pay their people no matter where they work. So that was how they did it. There was talk in our company about adjusting salaries based on geography, but we didn't do it. We said, nope, I just didn't feel good about that. If we're willing to pay somebody X dollars if they're in Vancouver, if they want to go live in Saskatchewan somewhere, knock themselves out, we'll pay them the same. Danger pay.
This is Dale Lutz, live and unfiltered. Yeah, we used to have albums like that, right? Live and unfiltered, raw here. But anyways. So one issue is how do you measure productivity? So on the one hand, it sounds good to have people working remotely, but of course, when you're the employer, you're paying a certain salary. How do you know, like how do you measure the productivity of that person?
Arguably, it's not that different. For knowledge work, whether they're in their office or they're at home, if somebody wants to be on Facebook all day long, they're going to do it. And so you just need your team leads, your supervisors to be aware of what people seem to be doing. What are the outcomes? What are the outputs that people are doing? I don't want to, you could be evil and install software that watches their eyes and stuff. We're never going to do anything like that. But we are going to say, hey, you said you're going to do this sort of stuff and you don't. Many of our teams have a culture of what's called a daily stand-up where you say what you did yesterday and what you're going to do today. If you never actually have anything new to say after a little period of time, there'll be hell to pay. Sorry.
Good. Sorry, Paul, did you delete that? Because of Dale, we have a 5-second delay. So that'll be neutered
Struck
out.
from the record.
And does that remind you of any Beatles song?
Oh, well, you wanted me to sing that. I was actually going to riff on The Lonely People. All the Lonely People, Rick.
We should do a survey. Who knows that song, All the Lonely People?
Yeah, where do they all come from? They all come from working home alone, actually, is the answer. I mean, it is true. At the loneliness side for many of my staff it's like an epidemic, frankly. And for some of them, it was very, very, very hard. And at least now, there's a cohort of them that are able to come back and be together. But seriously, the the loneliness side of remote work is a real thing. And again, if you are a company that's got people working in a hybrid way, you have to be aware of that. And we just did training actually yesterday at SAFE. It was a 4-hour session about mental health and how as supervisors we can be empathetic and try to look for warning signs and connect people with help. It was a wonderful session, and I think it's more important than it's ever been, because that's another sort of dark side of this remote thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's a question exactly on that topic, and it's interesting from a Christian standpoint, from a missional standpoint. So tech has made us more connected than ever, and yet it seems that people are more lonely than ever, which is this irony that I think we all are familiar with. So how do you deal with that? Is there a newly important missional imperative for business leaders to build community? So let's say, as a Christian business leader, should you think, well, I want to build community. People need community. And we know for a lot of people, given deinstitutionalization, churches generally aren't that important. Other community centers aren't that important. So really, for a lot of people, work is all they've got. Yeah. If we were blunt, like, work is the only community they've got. They put their heart and soul into it. They don't have friends. They don't have church networks. All these other things, that's all they've got. So then if you're working remotely, you're going to be in trouble. So how do you view it from a missional standpoint? Like, what to do about that?
I think you have to look for ways to bring the group together, to make connections. And if you can do it physically, if people are at least located around, create events. One of the things some of our teams do is a team building exercise where they volunteer, for example, at the food bank. And so get them to physically come there and work shoulder to shoulder. That's been very, very successful, and having a culture where that is kind of a normal thing to do. There is out there a desire to do good. So if you can combine doing good with creating community, then that's a big one.
Mm-hmm. So we've got 1 minute left. So can you leave people with a final thought, something related to the future of work, maybe some takeaway that you'd like to share with people as we close?
I think that the thing I'd leave you all with is that it's a wide open playing field. And so you all have to choose your own adventure. You have to figure out what is right for your company, what's right for your staff and your circumstances, what do you want to have as your outcome, and then you can create it. Just like that last slide said, you can create it. So there you go. It was much easier when you said, oh, we're all going to go to the office. Like, that was an easy time. The easy days are gone, and now we have to make do and make the best, not even the best, make something fantastic with the opportunity we have now.
Great. Can we thank Dale?